Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. I'm glad to welcome you here to the North Carolina Department of Information Technology webinar for counties. Today, I would like to introduce you to Angie Bailey. She is the Director of the Broadband Infrastructure Office, and she's joined here by a number of her team. They will be walking you through some slides, and then we will take questions at the end. As a note of housekeeping, please use the Q&A function, not the chat function. It's been disabled. So please use the Q&A function to submit your questions, and we will answer them all at the end. Again, thank you so much for joining us today. And now I'm going to hand it over to Angie Bailey.
Thank you, Crystal. And thanks everybody for joining us today. My name is Angie Bailey. I'm Director of the Broadband Infrastructure Office at NCDIT. And I want to shout out to George Collier on my team, who is our Director of who's our Infrastructure Funding and Policy Lead. Jim Corin is also with us from our team, who is our State Broadband Liaison. Keith Conover, who many of you all have worked with. He is now, his role is working primarily with broadband providers in the state. He's our Senior Network Analyst. And then we also have Ben Shelton on with us, and Ben is a partner of ours in the Center for Geographic Information and Analysis, which is part of NCDIT. And so Ben's going to help us and talk about mapping with everybody today. So thanks for being with us. Next, our first slide, please. So what we wanted to do today, to be honest, we've had a fair amount of sessions in the past few weeks. Was to share information. We did a full session on Great Grant a few weeks ago. That program launched on January 31st. We did some participation with school government and office hours last week, and participated on a call with the Association of County Commissioners on their county manager call last week. So if you all have participated in these things, some of this may seem a bit redundant, but there's so much information and so much to track right now that we wanted to kind of offer one full session just for counties on current opportunities, and get it recorded and put it on our website so that we have everything kind of captured in one place for you, at least as of this moment. So that's our goal for today. We're going to talk a little bit about our division and some changes at NCDIT. We'll obviously run through our broadband funding programs and kind of key opportunities at the moment. We're going to talk a little bit about mapping, and then have some time for Q&A. So, and again, lots going on. So we're really going to try to focus on kind of key points that we hope that you all are aware of right now. Next slide, please. So for us at NCDIT, we've worked with many counties over the years. I think the Bio Office was originally created in 2015 at DIT. But now that, I think with the pandemic, folks have realized, folks that may not have realized before, how important broadband is for the infrastructure of our lives, really. And so last summer, Governor Cooper created the Division of Broadband and Digital Equity within NCDIT, and he also created the Office of Digital Equity and Literacy. And so we are still the Bio Office focused on infrastructure. Our sister office is the Office of Digital Equity and Literacy, and we make up now the Division of Broadband and Digital Equity at NCDIT. Nate Denny is our Deputy Secretary for Broadband and Digital Equity. And so, as we have all these dollars coming through and this kind of heightened awareness on programs and investments for the state, that's kind of our structure now. The governor's plan, we know that at least 1.1 million North Carolina households are unserved with broadband, or or folks have challenges with accessing broadband or digital literacy. And so that's kind of the pillar of the governor's plan, is to focus on infrastructure, affordability, and also digital literacy and enablement. So that's our goal within our division. Next slide, please. And so our mission points really are, obviously still to expand broadband access across the state, to build a sustainable team to deliver digital equity to North Carolina, that we are ramping up, as you all can imagine, with the ARPA dollars that are now out here. We want to make sure we're leveraging data to identify and understand community needs and make sure we're reaching the right areas. We want to enable more North Carolinians to be able to afford high-speed internet, and then of course increasing digital literacy. So those are the mission points for our new division. Next slide, please. And so our success metrics, right now, I think you all probably know that have especially worked with us in the past. We do rely, most folks across the country rely on FCC data for broadband availability, for snapshots of broadband availability. So with that data, our 95.5% served with broadband access is in quotes because we know that's not granular. But we do want to get to at least 98% of folks with access to broadband by 2025, and that would be not in quotes, if that makes sense. We do want to increase broadband internet subscriptions to 80% and make sure that all homes with children have access to broadband and are subscribing. And then we have a focus on adoption rates across racial subgroups. So those are some of the metrics that we're looking at and working with as a division. Next slide, please. And so where we are now, I'm sure that you all are aware of this, but last March, of course, Congress passed the American Rescue Plan Act. For the state level, those dollars had to be appropriated through the state budget. And so in November, when the state budget passed, that's when the ARPA dollars were appropriated for our state programs. So we do have an appropriation of just over $1 billion in ARPA dollars for state programs that are coming through our division. Another thing that we won't go into today in detail, but just to be aware, is there's also the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which is another federal act that passed, I believe, in November, and that has another $65 billion in broadband investments for the country. That will be 48 billion of that will be rolling out through the NTIA, which is part of the U.S. Department of Commerce. And so that is just to kind of note, we are tracking that funding. We do anticipate some of those dollars would likely come through our division. And a lot of more information about those funding opportunities on IIJA comes out in May. So we're tracking that, but at the moment, we're obviously focused on these ARPA pots. Next slide, please. And so we do have multiple funding programs that have been appropriated. If you have time, if you can visit our website at ncbroadband.gov/grants, we have a listing of these pots, which are shown here on this slide. And so essentially it's $941 million in federal money for infrastructure projects, infrastructure programs. 30 million of that is an additional 30 million is state funding. So there's our traditional Great Grant program, which many of y'all are probably familiar with, that we've had a great program in our office since 2018, and that is incenting private sector broadband providers to build to unserved areas in the state. So there's now a $350 million federal pot for Great Grant. That program launched on January 31st, so we're spending a fair amount of effort and focus on the Great Grant opportunity for this open round. So George Collier on our team will talk a bit about that. There's also a $400 million pot called, for a Completing Access to Broadband program, which we call CAB. The CAB program is a partnership directly between DIT, between our office and each county that wants to participate. And Jim Korn on our team is going to talk a bit about CAB. So those are really the two current things we want to make sure counties are focused on and aware of the opportunities. There is also a $90 million pot called Stopgap, which would be kind of areas that aren't served under the GRATE or CAB solutions, and that will roll out later in the year. There's also a $100 million pot for a pole replacement fund, which is essentially reimbursements to telecom providers that need to replace utility poles as part of their builds. There's $1 million for a mapping initiative. We are working to get more granular data on broadband availability and also digital equity demographics as we make these investments. And then there's on the other side of the house, our sister Office of Digital Equity and Literacy. There's a $50 million pot for awareness and digital literacy, and those programs are being developed right now. There's also a large digital equity effort in this new IIJA money that will be coming down the pipe later in the year. And then there's some administrative funding. So those are the pots. And again, we're trying to, we want to help you all focus on GRATE and CAB opportunities at the moment. it's hard for us to have GREAT and CAB launched at the same time because the unserved areas are similar, right? And so we're rolling out GREAT right now. CAB will come behind it, and then we'll move on from there. And to be honest, we're not, we don't know exactly how many applications will get under GREAT. We don't know how many counties want to participate in CAB. So we're just trying to keep the information kind of fluid and evergreen to keep y'all posted as best we can as all this evolves. All right, next slide, please. So, and again, I know this is a bit in the weeds, but you all as counties and local governments, I know you are familiar with the state fiscal recovery funds. As you know, you all have the local fiscal recovery funds, which is all kind of the same rules. So the SFRF dollars are what is funding our GREAT grant program, CAB, stopgap, and the pole replacement fund. And so as you all know, that final rule from U.S. Treasury came out on January 6th this year. It requires these broadband investments to be built to 100 projects, 100 down, 20 up, or scalable to 100 symmetrical. And so that's kind of, again, we won't go into all the federal rules today, but this funding is attached to those state and local fiscal recovery fund regulations. There's also a second pot called capital project funds, which is also U.S. Treasury money, and that is $273 million essentially that comes to North Carolina directly from Treasury. It's for capital improvements, and the state legislature has appropriated that in legislation for the GREAT grant program. So portion of GREAT, as it is in legislation now, will come from that pot. And so again, that has similar requirements about building to areas, building infrastructure of 100 down, a minimum of 100 down, 20 up, scalable to 100 symmetrical. And we're just, so, balancing all these kind of federal regulations is, I guess in complement to our state legislation is part of what we're working on and developing. Next slide, please. So I will turn it over to George Collier, who many of y'all know, to talk more about the GREAT grant program.
Thank you, Angie. Appreciate you. I was looking at our attendee list, and I see that there's a lot of our friends on the call or on the webinar today, and a lot of new friends that we're going to have after this webinar. But no, I appreciate you sharing all the highlights and overview of the programs within our department. So on January 31st, we opened the current round of GREAT using the $350 million of federal ARPA funds appropriated in Session Law 2021-180. Next slide, please. This website contains all relevant information about this round of GREAT, such as the guidelines, FAQ document, the recording from our information session that we held a couple of weeks ago, and directions for ISP applicants to access our online portal. But this also contains information that you as counties can reference as well. So there's a lot of information on this page. So I would recommend you browsing this at your convenience. Next page, please. So some of the highlights of the key provisions of our program in our GREAT grant, what we call our GREAT grant federal round. The only legal applicant and recipient for GREAT grant funds are broadband service providers. The funds will be used to build infrastructure to serve last mile unserved locations. That definition of unserved is very specific to our legislation and detailed in our guidance document. But essentially, these are locations that have less than 25 megabits download and 3 megabits upload speeds. The maximum grant award is $4 million, and no combination of awards shall exceed $8 million in a single county per fiscal year. Next slide, please. So, since ISPs are only the legal applicant for these funds, all of the counties on the line here, y'all are probably asking yourself, how can we participate in GREAT, or can we even participate in GREAT? Before I answer both of those questions, the first way, the way I'd like for y'all to understand GREAT is to understand that projects must be located in an eligible, economically distressed county. In Section 38.4A of North Carolina Session Law 2021-180, our authorizing legislation actually defines an eligible economically distressed county. Essentially, and as a summary, a project that is located in a Tier 1, 2, or rural census tract Tier 3 county is eligible for GREAT in this round. And we're also using the 2021 calendar year tier system provided by the North Carolina Department of Commerce. The legislation for the GREAT grant and CAB program states that a county that has utilized federal funding for broadband infrastructure on or after May 1, 2021, with the exception of funds for GREAT or CAB, is ineligible for these two state programs. So our interpretation of this legislation is that counties that have used local fiscal recovery funds, the ARPA dollars from U.S. Treasury for broadband infrastructure projects, are ineligible for GREAT and the CAB program. Our understanding of this intent from policymakers is to encourage counties to partner with the state on broadband infrastructure programs to best leverage the ARPA funds. So to answer our two questions that I posed in the previous slide is, how can you participate in GREAT? Well, one, we need to ensure that the projects are located in an economically distressed county. And two, if you all went out on your own to use your ARPA dollars on or after May 1st, 2021, when I say out on your own, independent of the two state programs stated here, for any type, if y'all use those funds for any type of broadband infrastructure projects, then you would be ineligible to participate in GREAT or CAB. And an ISP would not be able to apply for a project in your county. Next slide, please. North Carolina General Statute 143B-1373 codified the GREAT program's defined scoring matrix. Section 38.4A of Session Law 2021-180 updated specific criterion in the scoring matrix specifically for this round of GREAT. One of the criterion is how an applying ISP can qualify for points if they enter into a partnership. So an applying ISP can earn points if they enter into a partnership with a county by, one, using a county's infrastructure or other county-owned assets for the facilitation of broadband deployment, or two, a financial contribution. Partnerships can impact the scoring and match requirements for an ISP applicant. So to answer the question I posed earlier is, how can you all participate in GREAT as a county? You can participate by entering into a partnership with an applying ISP by, one, using your infrastructure or other assets, or a financial contribution. Next slide, please. So in this next section, I'm going to review and highlight this current round of GREAT scoring and match requirements. Next slide, please. As I stated earlier, our scoring matrix is defined in our legislation. It's a very competitive program and a defined scoring matrix. It's a sliding point scale. By legislation, we are to prioritize funding for the highest scoring applications. Our office will review all applications and give the applicants their final score, and then we'll also verify what those match requirements are. Next slide, please. On this slide is just a summary of the actual scoring criteria. You can find the more details about our scoring criteria in our guidance document in Section 5, or if you want to dig through legislation, if you're a political science nerd like I am, it's always good to look back at the authorizing legislation. You can check it out in the references that I provided in our presentation. But as a highlight, there are opportunities for applicants to earn points, and where counties could get involved is in that partnership criterion and the amount of match that you all provide to an applicant or propose to provide to an applicant as part of the additional points that the applicant can earn. Next slide, please. So this is just a highlight of our implementation formula. So we have a defined set of criterion for the scoring matrix. Partnership points, unserved households in the county, percentage of unserved households to be served, and the unserved businesses to be served, and a cost per household. So we add up all the points in the criteria to get an initial score, and we take that initial score and multiply it by our base speed multiplier, which is the speeds that the applicant would propose to serve to the entire project area. There's an amount or a value assigned to each of those speeds to get a subtotal score. And then we'll take that subtotal score and add in the additional points from either from the community broadband playbook and the amount of the values attached to the amounts that a county would commit to a great grant project in partnership with the applying ISP. Next slide, please. Now, an ISP applicant score will determine their match requirement. An applicant can seek out assistance from a third-party funding source, and a county is considered a third-party funding source. The program and the legislation states that an applicant may seek up to 50% of the required match from third-party funding or other grants. County ARPA funds and unrestricted general fund revenue are eligible sources. Next slide, please. Well, I'm sorry, previous slide. Sorry about that, Kelly. Advance one more. Yeah, there you go. Thank you. So below on the bottom row of this slide here, you'll see the sliding scale depending on the score of the applicant. An applicant can have a 30% to 50% match requirement, and the match is built on the total project cost of the project. So this just gives you an idea of what an applicant match could be in our program. Next slide, please. Section 38.4A of Session Law 2021-180 updated the program's match rules by potentially allowing a reduction in match for an applicant regardless of their score. If they enter into a financial part, or if they enter into a partnership with a county and the county is going to contribute their part, if the county's if the county partner's financial contribution consists partially of ARPA funds, the ISP applicant could potentially have a reduction in their match requirement down to 25%. If their county partner's financial contribution consists entirely of ARPA funds, the applicant could potentially have a 15% reduction in 15% match requirement. So with all of that being said, I don't think I adequately or eloquently stated, but the point of what I was trying to make is that counties do have the authority to participate in GRATE and CAB with specific requirements, and I'm going to turn over to Angie to introduce Jim Jim Korn to talk more about the CAB program at this point.
Thank you, George. And again, we know this is a lot, maybe having it recorded, and then you can go back and look at if there's pieces you need to listen to again, will be helpful. We probably need like some cliff notes that, great grant, the applicants are broadband providers. The providers are going to be wanting you to participate with them to get a higher score and to get reduced match. Well, actually, they're going to want you to help put in match, and then they can actually get this match reduction on this slide here if you put in ARPA dollars, which is big. We're talking about multi-million-dollar projects. If you can get your match reduced to 15% total, I mean, that's a lot. So you will probably be hearing from providers in your county Ben Shelton, when he presents on mapping, there is a space in our broadband planning maps that lists where you can look up all the providers in your county. That doesn't mean that they would be the only applicants for GREAT, but sometimes current incumbents may be more likely to apply. So anyway, it's a starting point. So that's great. And again, the whole session on GREAT is also on our website from a couple weeks ago. So next we're going to jump into the CAB program. Kelly, if we could go to the next slide, please. So CAB is the Completing Access to Broadband program that's currently under development, and Jim Corrin on our team is going to talk a bit about CAB.
Great, thank you so much, Angie. I appreciate it. I am Jim Corrin. I work for the Broadband Office, State Broadband Liaison. So I work with, I had the pleasure of working with both citizens and counties. And I'd like to just walk you through a very, very admittedly high-level view of the CAB program. I want to mention two things. First of all, this is a funding pot of $400 million. And it is a complement. We consider it a complementary program to the GREAT funding program. Next slide, please. This is here's some key provisions. Is this an exhaustive list? No, it's not. But these are the ones we consider to be important as you start to learn about and continue to learn about the CAB program. This is a partnership between the county and the North Carolina Department of Information Technology. This is a bidding process that must be developed. That's something that BIO will do. We want to mutually identify eligible unserved areas. No county may receive more than $4 million in aggregate funding from the CAB program in a fiscal year. $4 million, one fiscal year. The award must use county and state funds, and the counties will transfer funds to the states. The state provides program and fiscal oversight of the project. And we plan to award pilot CAB program counties in Q3 22. Next slide, please. Here's some next steps. If you're on this call and you haven't done these steps, we would respectfully request that you consider doing so. One is to complete the county survey that came from our office, and please complete it by next Monday, February 28th. Let me remind you specifically that survey appears in an email that was sent to all county managers in the state. The most recent email was sent to you yesterday. So please, it was sent from this address, cabprogram@nc.gov. Make sure you add that to your safe senders list. And please designate a primary contact who will coordinate with us on CAB programming, on GREAT grant programming, and all other upcoming infrastructure programs. I wanted to make sure that I am clear on this. That survey that we are asking you to complete sits inside the email that we sent most recently yesterday. And I want to make sure that you do remember that counties can participate in both programs through partnerships. And that takes care of my portion. And Angie, are you going to introduce the next speaker?
Yep, thank you, Jim.
Everybody.
And so again, to Jim's point, the survey that was sent out, again, it was sent to county managers. We're asking that you all please designate who you want us working with. We know everyone's busy. And the activities that we're asking about is kind of helping us plan for CAB and how it will be rolled out essentially. So thank you for looking at that and taking the time to complete that. Next slide, please. And so mapping, and I'll turn this over in 1 minute. I just want to say, the foundation of all of these investments really is based on broadband mapping work. There's, the policy perspective that if we're spending public dollars on broadband and infrastructure investments, that we shouldn't be building in areas that already have some type of private service. And so, identifying what really is unserved based on speed thresholds, is a huge part of this work. We do the Center for Geographic Information and Analysis, again, who's our partner at NCDIT, does our mapping work, is a huge resource for us. And then we'll talk about NC1 Map, which is our state GIS resource. And he's going to go over some of the tools that will be useful to you all as counties. Again, on GREAT, you all wouldn't be the applicants, but we want you to be aware of the mapping tool. Generally, the broadband provider applicants are probably going to have a sense of where they want to go in your county if they're applying for a GREAT grant in your county. The broadband project planning map is going to be, I think, a useful tool for you. And as we dig into the CAB work, that's when we will be working more with you on mapping and what's really in what the areas in your county really are that need service. So Ben Shelton, turning it over to you.
Thanks, Angie. Like Angie mentioned, the mapping piece is a big portion of just understanding what's going on around the state in terms of broadband availability. And I'll share my screen here and show off a little bit about some of the mapping efforts that we're undertaking at the state level to try to at least get you baseline information to help understand what's going on in your particular area. So first I wanted to direct everyone to our main portal for GIS data. It's called NC1 Map. NC1map.gov will get you to this initial screen here. And there's a lot of different data sets that CGIA and my organization and our Geographic Information Coordinating Council makes available all of this spatial information through this portal. But in terms of broadband, there's a couple ways to access the broadband page on NC1 Map. At the top, there's a data projects section, and broadband is listed as one of the main projects we have there. But if you scroll down, there is a whole statewide data initiatives section. You'll see things like Next Generation 911, our ortho imagery program, and specifically broadband. So clicking on that or using the menu at the top like I showed will get you to this main broadband page that contains all of the mapping applications that we've put together. And also gets you access to the data. So if you have your own GIS groups looking at broadband in your counties, using these kind of data buttons will take you into some interfaces where you can access streaming services for all of these data sets or download in different formats, things like that, and some metadata behind each data set. So that's always a good resource for people who are doing their own mapping and want to kind of customize the maps to look at their own data that they have to add to it. But specifically, Angie mentioned the North Carolina GREAT Grant online mapping tool. So clicking the view button will take you into this tool. And this tool is primarily aimed and geared towards the broadband providers themselves. So as part of the GREAT Grant program, it's a requirement that they are telling us the exact locations that they want to serve with each application. And they do so with this tool and using the address data set that we've added to here. So as you zoom in, you'll see the actual address points show up. And this address data is coming straight from the recent Next Generation 911 project. So through that 911 project, we're able to aggregate all of this address data from all the different county and local addressing authorities. So, if you're on this call and you participated in that Next Generation 911 project, we just wanted to say thank you for allowing us to access this data and leverage it so that we can understand a little bit more about the exact locations that these broadband providers are submitting. So, we give them some baseline data in the FCC data sets to drive them to census blocks that we understand have less than 25 megabytes per second download and 3 megabytes per second upload, so that they can kind of identify those areas, export the addresses using the same data set, which is very important, It makes this process a lot easier when we have 70 to 100 applications coming in. We can quickly analyze apples to apples using the same data set, the same addresses, instead of having different addresses coming from different sources. So this is a really key component to the GREAT Grant program. I won't get into a lot of this map. It is kind of geared towards the GREAT Grant map, but it does kind of just highlight the ineligible areas based on the legislation in the gray out areas, and then the red and orange areas are the FCC data that we're kind of highlighting as possible funding location. And then going back to the NC1 map page, Angie mentioned the broadband project planning dashboard. This is I think a key one to people on this call, because it'll kind of allow you to get a better picture of what's going on in the county level. So what we've done is we've taken the FCC Form 477 data. This is broadband provider reported data to the FCC. It is census block based, so if one household in a census block is receiving service at a specific level, that entire census block is reported as having that service. So that does kind of overstate some of the coverage of the broadband providers, and we understand that that is the case. So we try to fill the gaps in with other data sets to give us a little better context around what's going on in the census block. So in this map, we have taken the FCC data and we've summarized for every census block how many providers are in that census block, what technologies are being deployed, and what speeds are being served. And so using that, we're able to symbolize each census block on the best available technology that is in that specific census block using the symbology here on the left-hand side. So the green areas will either have cable or fiber, and typically we'll be able to receive speeds above 25.3. But then as you get into the red, the dark red is kind of like no providers except satellite. And then DSL is the only providers in some of these areas. And so we're trying to gauge what the capabilities are in that census block based on what the FCC is reporting. We've also provided where the federally funded areas are through the FCC ARTOFF, the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund. Those were recent awards last year, and those are the areas shown in dark blue. These are just the terrestrial awards, not satellite providers. But you can see where those federal funding areas are based on that dark blue. And then the light blue points are previous GREAT Grant round funded locations. So with all of that, you can go up to the top right and just picking a county like Harnett County will filter the map and show you a closer view of Harnett County. Zooming in also turns on our broadband community survey data. So the Broadband Infrastructure Office worked with the Friday Institute out of NC State, and they developed this broadband survey that collects responses from the community on what level of service and some speed test data that they're receiving at individual household locations. They also have a phone survey for those that don't have internet service. Because you can't take an internet survey if you don't have internet. So there's that option, and it's also in 2 languages. It's in English and Spanish. So trying to cover our bases to provide this to as many people as possible. And with this data, what you're seeing on the map here are yellow points are those who have taken speed tests and have received less than 25.3 speeds. The red points are those that have no service at all. And so you'll see a lot of these green areas that are reported by the FCC as having service at that 25.3 level. There's still quite a few households within those locations that do not get that service. So that just really highlights the need for more granular data coming from the FCC, which the FCC does have plans to collect that address level data. We still feel like that's a couple years off. And we're working to kind of fill in the gap as well, but we're just not at that point. We still have to rely on the census block data set. But once you've filtered by this county, you can see the list of providers here on the right that are located in this county. And if you're doing some project planning, you need to, look at a specific neighborhood or specific region of the county and understand who's the providers in that area and who you could work with to kind of develop projects. You can click any one of these providers and really quickly see what the FCC is reporting as their location. So again, this is the census block methodology, so it's probably overstating their coverage area, but it's the best we have, and will get you at least started to understand the more granular piece of the puzzle. So that's CenturyLink's service area in this Harnett County example. You can see there's AT&T, some yellow there. There's also, there's probably about 30 different providers, and you can quickly see some of them may, provide only to one community, one apartment complex, things like that. So using this will get you at least started with talking with the correct providers in that area if you're looking at project planning. And so those are the two main tools that I wanted to cover. We do have other data sets on NC1 Map, so feel free to peruse what we put out there. And if there's comments or feedback on any of these things, we're always looking to improve as we go along. But otherwise, I think that's all I had, Angie, unless you had something to add to the map.
Thank you, Ben. I appreciate it. Ben does an amazing job working with us on mapping, so thank you for that. So we've talked about having potentially some sessions just on mapping in the coming weeks or months, and I think we will definitely do that as we move into the CAB session or the CAB work. So I just want to share that with counties. I think Kelly. Oh yeah, okay. So we do know mapping is a big focus. We will continue to work with you all on mapping. And we know that there's different ways that counties may or may not be engaged in the, some may be very interested in mapping, some may just want to provide match, some may want to, pushing out this NC Broadband survey tool is really helpful because it helps us identify unserved locations in your counties. So there's lots of ways to be engaged. For questions, and again, because we've just been trying to kind of cover key highlights today. For questions on the CAB program, if you could please email cabprogram@nc.gov directly, that would be super. We're trying to collect all of our questions in one email box, and then we're trying to provide written responses because we know there's a lot of information. We need to be consistent, and we want to make sure we're providing clear guidance. We will also, there's a page for each program on our website, so ncbroadband.gov/grants/CAB grant has information specific to CAB. We will be developing some FAQs around CAB and posting, information as it's updated to that page. For mapping questions, we ask that you please submit those to broadbandmapping@nc.gov. Those actually go to Ben and some members of his team directly. Grade Grant, we ask you to please email gradegrant@nc.gov directly, and that's where we're collecting and answering those questions. We do also have on our Grade Grant page the FAQ document that's being refreshed weekly or bi-weekly, depending on the amount of questions. So those are some of the resources we will point you to. This session for today will be posted online, and we will continue. So we want to kind of get this information out. I know it's a bit redundant. We have participated in some sessions with school government, Association of County Commissioners, and done some information sessions for COGS, which we will continue. But I think the information will continue to, we'll have more and more updates for you as the months move along. So please use our website. On the school government and the association, I wanted to thank them for their partnership with us. So, today we've covered opportunities with GREAT, opportunities with CAB, which are still rolling out. But school government also has provided some information on how you can go it alone, which is kind of if you don't want to participate in state programs or, for whatever reason, counties do have the authority under, let's see, it's General Statute 153A-459 to provide incentive grants to private providers broadband. So there's that avenue. And then there's also counties that may choose to use their own local fiscal recovery funds for projects. on their own. And so the school government's provided some great information on that. And I think if anyone's from school government's on the call, they're welcome to chime in, and also the Association of County Commissioners on kind of policy issues around all of this. I believe both groups are working with county attorneys on kind of digging into these issues as well. And so we will all be working to, continue to provide as much information as we can so y'all can make the choices, the best choices for your counties. So I think that's all we have as far as information to share out, but we're happy to take questions from anyone.
Yes, we have a few questions.
Okay.
The first question is, will this recording be available? Yes, it will be. And will it be sent out via email? Yes, it will be. So we'll make sure you receive that. It looks like we have a question specifically on mapping that Ben is addressing. I'm not sure if the entire group can see that though. So Ben, if you wouldn't mind. So if there are pink and tan blocks within a census tract, is the whole census tract eligible, or just the specific roads or sections shown in the highlighted areas of the map?
Right. Yeah. So if that's referring to the GREAT grant tool, the pink areas are the census blocks that the FCC has reported as not having service at the 25.3 threshold. So those entire blocks should be eligible for funding. The tan/orange are just blocks where the FCC has reported it as being served, but we have received community surveys in those blocks saying that there are pockets that may be unserved. So the orange blocks are there to kind of notate that further investigation is necessary to see what's going on the ground. So pieces of those orange blocks, tan blocks could be eligible, but definitely the red blocks are eligible because that's what the FCC is saying. The entire block is not served at that threshold.
And just to add also, the requirements for the GREAT grant program are very specific, very prescriptive in legislation around unserved. So there's, the answers may be different if you're talking about GREAT versus, CAB. We're still looking at the legislation talks about unserved, which is the same definition. It talks a bit about underserved, although that's not defined. So we're looking to see whether the CAB areas would be any different than the GREAT areas.
Right. Yeah. Good point.
Okay. Next question. If a census block is part of an ARTOFF award, but the FCC 477 lists an internet provider as greater than 25.3, does the ARTOFF status take precedence for being ineligible? Either way, these two locations are not actually served, and we have this data.
Do you want to take that, Angie?
So I think the way that I hear the question, is that yes, if so, there's in the legislation for GREAT and for CAB, actually for unserved areas, if an area is receiving other state or federal investments, that meet the speed criteria, then and the definition of broadband service, those are ineligible for these GREAT and CAB investments. And so essentially ARTOFF is the FCC's Rural Digital Opportunity Fund. If the FCC is investing in an area with wired technologies, then we see those areas as being ineligible for our bio investments based on the legislation. So in some ways, I don't think the FCC data, in some ways it's a moot point if it's an ARTOFF area, and that's been set aside for ARTOFF, then that's kind of the overlying factor. Ben, do you agree?
Right. Yes. The ARTOFF data is coming straight from the FCC and NTIA, so that's the latest that we have. So those census blocks would be receiving federal funding and would be ineligible based on the legislation.
Right.
So that was my understanding.
And so just to add, if an area has an ARTOFF award that's for satellite, we still consider that unserved based on our state definition of broadband service. And so the ARTOFF areas with satellite awards would still be eligible. At least it wouldn't be protected under ARTOFF as in. Right,
and when we filtered out the satellite awards in the maps that you see online, so that has been taken out of the maps.
So just to add, and I'm not going to read this whole definition of what an unserved area is in our legislation, but you can find that on page 497 of Session Law 2021-180. There's a definition of unserved area, and it specifically states, where private provider has been designated to receive funds through other state or federally funded programs, where it would make those areas ineligible. Specifically, I think that the question was asking about the ARTOFF award, at least the way I interpreted the question. They were asking about the ARTOFF award, and those locations not actually being served right now, but based on our legislation, those ARTOFF areas for the terrestrial wired providers would be ineligible for the GREAT program.
Great. If we use ARPA dollars for broadband consulting, like county infrastructure or inventory study, would that eliminate us from partnering with an ISP on an infrastructure project?
No, the way the legislation reads is that a county that has utilized federal funding for broadband infrastructure on or after May 1, 2021 shall be ineligible. I think for kind of planning and consulting, that would not make a county ineligible from partnering with an ISP that had an interest in their county.
Yeah, I think we read that to be broadband infrastructure, builds essentially.
Builds or deployment.
Investments, yeah.
Right.
Okay, we've got another. If an ISP claims a census block after the December 2020 release, will that change the eligible areas on the GREAT and CAB?
I'm not sure what that means by claims a census block.
Maybe a reporting service in the FCC data.
So part of the process, and I'm not sure I understand it either, but part of our application process in the GREAT program, there is where we have to publicly post all of the applications that we receive, and then there is a protest process built into the program. So there's a defined process, and there is very specific information about how an internet service provider can protest applications. So there is, if I interpreted that question correctly, depending on the applications that come in and what's posted, yeah, I mean, a provider could come in and protest the proposed project area based on the standards defined in our guidance document and our legislation. Crystal, I think you skipped over a question about, I believe it was mentioned that CAB program would be launched.
I was coming back to that, George.
Oh,
You
I'm
beat
sorry.
me to it.
Sorry about that. I just wanted to make sure we address that question before we move forward.
Absolutely. So go ahead, George.
Yeah. So the question was, I believe it was mentioned the CAB program would launch with pilot counties. How will those counties be selected? I'm going to defer to our director, Angie Bailey, on that question.
Okay. Yeah, we're still determining what that would look like. So the survey data that we collect from the surveys that we sent out, we'll be using that and kind of looking at what activities are going on in different counties to try to determine what the pilots would be, and how does that look? And just to kind of clarify, it being a pilot county, there's nothing really different about it except that we just kind of need a small group to help us as we'd like to be working with a small group of counties as we're kind of developing the program to make sure we're thinking through all the pieces. So that would be a part of it, as well as being willing to work with us as we think through all these issues like state procurement and local procurement and things like that. So we'll be getting more. The surveys are due next week, so we'll be getting more information out about that in the next couple weeks.
Okay, next up, we have for counties with relatively small population, would an ISP ever be able to receive a score high enough to receive an award?
Yes, if you're talking about GREAT grant, I mean, to be honest, I don't want to say that there's so much money right now with the 350 million. We believe that every, even the great scoring is based on kind of cost per household and serving the most amount of households. But I think with the funding out there, there's a lot of projects that will be funded. To be honest, we hope that we get $350 million worth of projects. I think we will. But yes.
Angie, can I interrupt, please?
Yep.
So that's a great question. We have in the past, though, looked at counties that had a cost per household at what would be considered a high level and done field visits on those and awarded those. That's not a promise by any means, but we have been able to do that. And that was when we had our original funding for GREAT, not these larger funding opportunities. So I would not be discouraged, and I would not discount any ISP that might be interested in trying to put in an application. That's all.
Yeah, I think you can do the math. I mean, there's $350 million available for this round of GREAT. There's a cap of $4 million, for a single project. We're going to fund. We're going to go, and the priority, we have to prioritize the highest scoring applications, for funding. We just don't know the demand, but when you do the math and you look at the amount of available funds, if there are multiple applications in one county, we've got to fund the highest scoring applicant in that one county first, and then just go down the list. So at least one county gets at least one project is awarded in each county. And thinking in those terms, the amount of money that's available, there's potential. If there's an eligible project and an eligible applicant, then projects could get funded, no matter the size.
And George, it's 8 million per county, right? Per GREAT.
Yeah, so it's 8 million. No more than $8 million can be awarded in a single county in a fiscal year. So what that means is that you can have multiple applications in your county, and those applications could potentially get funded if all of the if we have available funds and it doesn't exceed that $8 million cap.
Okay, before we move on to our last question, Shannon Tufts from the School of Government wrote in to help clarify some of Deborah Porto's questions that we were not quite sure how to answer earlier. And they said, from our School of Government understanding, if the census blocks in question has been awarded under ARTOFF, then it is no longer eligible for GREAT or CAB. I hope that answers the question.
That is correct.
Okay, and now on to the last question, unless anyone wants to put any in the chat. So please go ahead and add them in the Q&A. Okay, so the last question we have as of now is, clicking on a community survey point shows the household speed data information. Scrolling to the second page shows the provider and speed tier. When the household data shows below 25.3, but the provider speed tier shows greater than 25.3, how is that interpreted? Looks like the provider is claiming a greater speed than what's actually provided on the ground.
Right, and what you're selecting on the map there is the survey point. That's the page 1 as you referred to, and then the page 2 is what the FCC Form 477 data is reporting, and that's why we provide those surveys, is to show the gaps in that FCC data. The FCC is only reporting it at a census block level, so there may be some households in that census block that are receiving that provider reported service. But then there's other areas that through the community surveys that we can highlight that are not receiving that same level of service. So that's why you're seeing the differences there. How that's interpreted for the eligibility, that's a question for Angie and George for these programs.
Okay, we don't have any other questions at this time. I want to thank everyone for attending today, and thank you to our panelists for providing such detailed information about the GREAT grant and the CAB program that's upcoming, and means to contact us if you have any questions. Again, these slides will be placed on our website on the CAB page, and we will be emailing it out to everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.